You'll have 2 minutes each. So Ron, would you mind introducing yourself first?
I'm Ron Bemis. We have a ranch down in the Whitewater watershed, or the Douglas watershed. I worked as a private consultant in range consulting for the last couple of decades. Before that, I was with NRCS, on and off national staff, and who were helping consolidate and facilitate the Alpine Borderlands group. Prior to that, I worked on farm and ranch management with the USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Soil Conservation Service. Part of my duties involved developing irrigation water management plans and correlating plant communities with soils for the cooperative soil survey. Prior to that, I was in Mojave County doing the same type of work, and spent a year or two managing a corporate ranch for the Swiss Corporation.
Ron, one quick thing. If you could answer the question, if the AMA takes effect, will it affect you personally, and if so, how?
It will affect us personally. Our family has been on the land since the early possibly late 1800s. And we have a small ranch with a small amount of farmland. We have 3 irrigation wells. We can only pump one of them due to the INA. And if this AMA goes through and we lose the water right on the one well we can pump, probably our kids who have plans to come back to their ranch and farm and raise cattle for their retirement will not be able to afford to do that. And that approximate 3 square miles will turn into subdivision land right next to the Whitewater Wildlife Area. The implications are horrendous when we do things.
Thank you. Mr. Keeling, also if you'd answer the question, if the AMA takes effect, will it affect you personally, and if so, how?
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Rod Keeling. My wife, Jan Schaefer, and I own Keeling Schaefer Vineyards. We came down here 22 years ago to start a commercial winery and vineyard on Rock Creek. We're in the same zip code as Pierce. Our address is Pierce. It's 10 miles south of the Chip Collar National Monument, just east of Highway 181. In 2000, when we came down here, there was less than 60 acres of producing vineyards in this valley. We were not the first, but wine growing here was definitely not certain for success. Today, there are nearly 2,000 acres of vineyards planted in the Wilcox and Douglas basins, and those 2 basins, particularly Wilcox, provide 80% of the wine fruit for the state. We were the 9th winery licensed in Arizona, and now there are 125, and most of them need the fruit from the Wilcox area. We're in a situation right now where we are trying to expand our vineyard. We have 90 acres total now. We started with 18. We have a plan laid out, a 24-acre addition that we spent quite a bit of money on already. The creation of an AMA may or may not deny us the right to irrigate this new vineyard. And they can't tell you whether we would meet the requirements for an exemption or not. So we oppose the AMA primarily because we don't believe it's going to work and because it will affect the Arizona wine industry and us personally. Thank you.
Sonia?
Hello, I'm Sonia Gasho. I ranch here in Pierce and the Dragoons. We own Sierra Lumber in Wilcox. I'm the current Cochise County Farm and Livestock Bureau president. I've served as president and now serve as board member for the Cochise Graham Cattle Growers Association, and I'm also on the Wilcox Chamber board for the Chamber of Commerce. If an AMA happens in the Wilcox watershed, it will not affect my wells that I use as a rancher, but it will affect our communities, and it will potentially create a huge impact on our business in Wilcox. And I don't want to see any of our neighbors, homeowners or farmers, adversely affected.
All right, Steve.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Steve Kissel. I wasn't born in Arizona, but been living here since 1965, so I've certainly learned how to live in the desert, and I've certainly taken water conservation seriously all my life. My father was a hydrologist and taught us from an early age the importance of sustainability in the desert, especially when it came to water and how important that was. I became a resident down here in the Pierce Sunsites area in 1998. Bought some property here. My wife and I have slowly but surely been building our house here by ourselves. I call it a labor of love. She calls it a labor of something else. But we love it down here. The lifestyle here, the rural lifestyle is great. Let me talk a little bit about AMA. This question about how it'll affect me. To me, this is not about how the AMA will affect. You shouldn't be asking a question about how the AMA will affect me personally. But it's more about how the dropping water tables in our area and the serious hydrological issues we have in this area will impact the future of the community. If we don't take action now and establish an AMA, this has been a problem for a long time. Arizona Department of Water Resources called this the most endangered water basin in the state. But this is really about what kind of future we want here in this beautiful valley. And for our families, our neighbors, and our community as a whole. And we get to help form that here. We have a say in this. This is democracy in action. Do we want to live in a community where our water, a vital resource to sustain life, is mined to exhaustion? Or one where our precious water resources are managed sustainably and support a vibrant community long into the future? Thank you.
Hello, and I'll say thanks for everyone coming again also, and I'll tell you there's almost a dozen other places I'd rather be right now, but I'm here, and I'm here because I think this is important. My name is Mark Spencer. I've lived in Arizona since 1973. I've been running for municipal growth all my life. Moved to Maricopa in 1987. Actually came down here a short time after looking at the Eastern Valley because I was told it's going to be all wine vineyards there one day and that I should buy land. 10 years later, I came back in 1998. I ended up buying land. Matter of fact, about the same time, I think Mr. Keeling did, and actually went to his place and made one of his first batches of wine, if I remember correctly, with Pete and Judy Lechtenbaum. Some people remember that, and they're why my wife and I actually live here today. My girls attended high school here, and were partakers in Al's place, if any of you remember that. Anyway, we've been here a long time. As a profession, I'm an aerospace engineer. I work on advanced weapon systems, and I help to troubleshoot complex problems and root cause and corrective analysis, and I think that applies here. We have a very complex problem. It's a big problem. I think that to understand how it affects me, you have to understand how no AMA has affected me. My well has already gone dry once. Cost me $14,000 to deepen it. I have 6 neighbors whose wells are all dry now. Unfortunately, they can't afford to deepen their wells. We have a list of wells that are within 10 feet of going dry right now in the valley, and without something, these wells are going to go dry. This is important to everybody, even the vineyards, the farmers. Everybody needs what's underneath our feet. We have that in common, the water. It's the only place we get water from. If it passes, I believe it will be stability for our valley. It will let the rest of the world know that we're serious about the problem. It will increase the value, property values, because of stability. It will even increase the value of irrigated land because they ain't making any more of it if we get the AMA, okay? That's how it would affect me. I think it's a positive thing. I don't think it's perfect, but we don't have time for perfect.
Nice to meet you guys. I'm Christian Sawyer, and I live in the Douglas Basin. I'm a techno-economic researcher. So that's a fancy word that means I look at like market complex systems. So I used to work on canals and energy projects, and you have to look at hydrology and evaporation rates, economy, community impacts, and all that stuff. And I kind of like that kind of work. But here I'm not doing it just because I like it. I've been studying the AMA laws and our hydrology and our geology for the last 1.5 years because I'm a well owner. My neighbor's wells have gone dry, and I'm trying to build a future, and I'm trying to fix the problem. And I can't fix it alone. It takes the whole community to get together behind a solution. And if the AMA passes, maybe my well won't go dry. Hopefully, a lot of other people's wells won't go dry. But also, it's going to mean for me a lot of work. Because I do believe the AMA can work, and it has worked, but I don't think it'll work if we just push the vote yes button and then walk away and hope that everything goes according to plan. There are lots of ways to make the AMA work with local community power, but that means we all have to work together, and that means I'm going to carry that responsibility to make sure I see us getting together, getting the management plan we want, making sure everything's going according to plan so that it does work. That's the only way anything's going to work, is if the community comes together, uses the power of law to control protect our assets, our water, so that we can have the future that we want here. Thank you.
Thank you. So in this next section, we're going to have several, I think it's 4 questions. And we're going to let the sides give their opposite or saying whatever opinions they have. But we're going to start on one side. That side will get 5 minutes to answer the question. The opposing side will have 4 minutes as a response. And then the side that started with the question will have a rebuttal period. Now, I just noticed that the Wi-Fi here isn't strong enough to make the timers on the screen work. So again, I'll be keeping the time. You may see some black holes in this presentation where the timer was, so forgive me for that. And we'll start with this first question. What water conservation measures other than the AMA are available? And we'll start with Mr. Bemis, Mr. Keeling, and Ms. Gashow. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. What water conservation measures other than AMAs are available? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is an IMA, which we live within in the Douglas watershed. Excuse me, I'm not sure if everyone understands what you're getting out of that. The Department of Water Resources doesn't do a whole lot of regulation on it, and it hasn't in the past. It could. But what it has ended up in is the farmers working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service getting cost share on their land to bring the latest science to irrigation to maximize efficiency of water applications. That's been working, and it keeps up with science. Science keeps it current through the government intervention of contracting to work with farmers on water and requiring that they prove they have acres assigned to the wells that they're working on. And any wells that did not have acres assigned to them cannot be irrigated within the INA. There's other alternatives out there also, and my wife and I are currently engaged in working with the County Cochise engineer looking at putting a groundwater recharge well at the corner of Central and Davis to recharge floodwaters that are coming out of the bar ditch instead of letting them just run down the ditch and out of the watershed. That's one of my big things is hydrologic function, and the more we develop land, the more we put our floodwaters onto the grid system and move them off the watershed as quickly as we can, because most people don't want 2 inches of floodwater on their 40 acres or their homesteads. In addition to that, we need to look at our road systems. When you look at the structures that have been being built, and traditionally they're box structures to move water under a highway, a developed road, and these structures are generally acting as a dam with a control valve on it, and running the water off the land as quick as they can, creating gullies on country that used to flood half mile wide on the big old grassy swells you see around. That's another alternative we have to look at. Then we need to really assess where we're going and how we're gonna get there. As other folks have suggested, we do need to do something. There's several things we can do. We need to really delve into proper hydrologic function and see how much water we can keep on our land and not just run down into the playa or into the whitewater draw where it either evaporates on the playa or runs into Mexico off the whitewater draw. And really, if we get an AMA, it's going to move management of our land further away from the land. And in my experience through the years of working with government and landowners, the further the management gets away from the land, the less effective and efficient it is. So there are alternatives out there. We do have problems and we need to address them. And I don't believe in implementing an AMA will help anybody's well in the next decade or so. It could actually have some negative effects. But with that, I'll yield the floor.
Thanks, Ron. You know, since 2014, I've been working on water issues in the Wilcox Basin. And I was on the Wilcox Working Group in 14 and 15 that came up with the groundwater conservation area proposal. And I also was appointed by the governor, Governor Ducey, to the Arizona Water Augmentation Board, and I served on that for 2 years. You know, there's probably several things we can do besides an AMA. An AMA has a limited ability to do the things that need to be done. I think we all pretty much agree on the problem. The problem is an overdraft, a 5-to-1 overdraft of this basin. And how are we going to restore this basin? And I think the AMA structure is probably not suited for us. Thank you.
All right. And we'll have a response, 4 minutes.
Well, I guess I'll start by saying I only disagree with a couple things. Other than that, I think we're going to go on and be friends after this, and I'm glad about that. Let me say this, augmentation, conservation ideas, they all have to play a part of this. The problem is, and as pointed out, this is a problem. We're deleting we're pumping our groundwater at 500% faster than it's being replenished. While all these ideas have to be done, we have to augment, for sure. We have to use conservation. The horse is sort of out of the barn. That's why I think, you know, the INA would have been a great idea 10 years ago. Today, the horse is out of the barn. We don't have time to wait. We don't have time for our legislators to write new legislation. We have an AMA. It does work. And by the way, the AMA meetings, the planning meetings are required to take place within our basin. Okay? The AMA statutes 361 times mentions the terms judicial review, which anybody sitting in this room can ask for judicial review over the plan. The AMA gives us not just an ability to freeze, which is what an INA would do, if I'm correct. It would freeze current irrigation. It would do that, but it would also give us tools over the next 10, 20, 30 years to incentivize and to roll back the current levels of irrigation, which is what's going to have to take place when 97% of the water being used is irrigation. You know, I love farmers. I'm not against farmers, but root cause corrective analysis, you have to go to the cause, not the symptom.
Yes, Ron mentioned the recharge. And clearly, if you talk to any hydrologist, there simply is not enough water for recharge to solve this problem. As Mark mentioned, and I think Rod acknowledged as well, we have at least a 5-to-1. Some hydrologists say it's as much as an 8-to-1 overdraft in the Wilcox Basin. The Douglas Basin is a little better, maybe 3-to-1, 4-to-1. So let's talk about recharge. There's simply not enough water. We don't get enough precipitation to overcome that. Just to give you a sense, Turkey Creek, which would be one of the main recharge channels coming into this basin, has a total flow of about 5,000 acre-feet in a year. That is a drop in the bucket. That's the water it takes to irrigate about 8 centripivots in a year. We have one corporation in this valley that's operating over 300 centripivots. How is 8 centripivots worth of water going back in? If we captured 100% of the water, it's going to make a difference. It just isn't. You talk to any hydrologist, they'll make that clear. The overdraft will always outpace the recharge. But recharge is important. Okay, and Ron also mentioned I'm sorry, no you didn't. Ron didn't mention anything, I'm sorry, Ron didn't mention anything about the irrigation district. And the irrigation district is something that the wine growers have come out strong in the publicity pamphlet. You got this publicity pamphlet from the county. And the irrigation district simply are not designed to control an overdraft in this area. And I can talk this magnitude. And I can talk to you about some of the details, but think about it. The largest shareholder in that irrigation district will be Riverview.
Yep, and they would be exempt from paying money toward the irrigation district. Not necessarily? Oh, well, listen to these guys then, 2 against 1. So we can do all these projects, and I think they're all good, these other solutions, but no matter what you do to recharge, the overdraft can always outpace the recharge. More pivots in the ground, like Riverview has. Whoops. Yep.
Your goal is not to make me stand up. Okay, we have 1 minute and only 1 minute for a rebuttal.
Well, the rebuttal, great, let's get to it. The poison pill of the AMA is that when it's created, the state, before it's created, the state owns all the groundwater. That's how it exists today. Once the AMA is created, the irrigators will own the groundwater, and it'll be a property right, okay? And that property right is in perpetuity. So that's the poison pill of the AMA. And what happens is they get awarded the amount of water they're going to be able to use, which is pretty close to what the water they're using now, and that's going to keep going. So, to talk about how we're going to reduce the overdraft of the AMA is probably not, we're going to be disappointed if the AMA passes and how effective it's going to be in reducing the overdraft. And we got to kind of keep our mind focused on that, as opposed to, we've got to focus on the problem. And I believe if we all got together and talked about this, we could come up with a better solution than the AMA.
Great.
But what do we implement? He himself tried, and the legislature did nothing. They drove up there, did meetings.
Okay, our next question seems rather obvious since most of these panelists have already expressed their concerns. But why do you believe the AMA is a good or bad idea? This time we're going to start with this table, which will have 5 minutes to answer, and we'll follow the same protocol. So, whenever you're ready.
I won't need as much time. With all due respect, Rod, I understand the concern that an AMA would grandfather, as the verbiage in the statute says. American jurisprudence is pretty simple. God gives rights, legislatures give privilege. A legislature can call anything a right. It is not a right. It is a privilege, especially when it's granted to a corporation. You can go read Howell versus Hinkle, US 206 from 1906 to learn that. It's very real. Just look at your Social Security. It was a trust fund, right? And it was look at the Affordable Care Act. It was it's whatever the legislature wants to do. If the plan needs to require to roll back irrigation, they can make changes, is what I'm saying. It's not as, I don't believe it's as concrete as some believe. If it were, that would be a problem, or it could be a problem. And I'm going to see, Steve?
Yeah, I want to just address, obviously change is difficult and people fear change, and the AMA will be a change. And there's a lot of talk about the impact it'll have on farmers here. Well, to kind of address that issue, I had the opportunity to speak with a farmer in the central in the Phoenix area a couple of days ago, and one of the questions I asked him, I said, how is it living under an AMA? He's farmed his whole life under an AMA. His family came here in the 1890s. He's a 4th generation farmer in the Chandler, Central Arizona area. He's also part of an irrigation district, and is very active in the Salt River Project. So I asked him, I says, what's this all about? He says, Steve, if we didn't have an AMA, we'd be out of water right now in Scottsdale. His original family farms were in the Scottsdale, Tempe basin there, right off the Salt River. because we wouldn't have any farms right now, probably. He said, if you want a secure water future, you have to plan for that future. And that is why the AMA is essential to ensure water future supply in this area. He's talking about our area. He says the small farmers should welcome an AMA. Otherwise, and these are his words, I know you've heard this probably from some folks that are pro-AMA, but he said that, I didn't promise, he said, otherwise the corporate farms with the deepest pockets will control the water. Small farmers have nothing to fear from the AMA.
Yep, and the AMA, it does cut back water use. And I know because I've looked at the management plans, and it's right there in it. The AMA code was designed for the purpose of cutting back water use. And this is a quote from the management plan. The code requires that the maximum annual groundwater allotment be reduced over time with increasing conservation requirements. That's how it's supposed to work. As Mr. Dobson is evidence of, it does a good job of doing that. It protects people's futures there. When I ask the question of, is this a good idea, I have to understand what good means. There's what's good for me, there's what's good for my business, and so on and so forth, but I really think, for me, I'll only speak for myself. I want to look at the good as that which helps the most people, that which is for the greatest common good. And sometimes that means sacrifice, and that's meant some sacrifice for me already. But unregulated water might be good for a few people, but is it really good for the vast majority of people? When you see how many hundreds of wells are going to go dry with the next, couple hundred feet, actually 200 feet depth, it's thousands of wells. Hundreds of feet with just the next hundreds of wells with just the next 10 feet of decline. Every 10 feet of decline, hundreds more wells are going to go dry in the Wilcox Basin. Tens in the Douglas Basin, not quite as dramatic, but each one of those is a family or a farm. And that's from the well registry. AMA, rapid expansion has stopped. You won't probably get a meter for the most part. Unless you're a farmer, you have to be pumping more than 10 acre feet, and you're getting more than 10 acres to get a meter and regulations. The vast majority of us will not have any regulations. And the big wells get their water use cut back. And then we have 3 points of control. We've got the judicial review, we've got public hearings, we've got appeals, and ultimately we've got citizen referendums if we need to change the AMA code, which has been done before. So we get a lot of code. I don't want to wait for legislators to put in some new laws that don't give us those community local control tools. It seems like I don't want to wait for that, so let's do an AMA.
Okay, we have 4 minutes for a response.
So obviously, we're the opposite side. I do not believe an AMA is a good idea for myself, our community, or our neighbors. It doesn't regulate irrigation other than saying no new irrigation can happen. So what that means is if someone has a water duty for the growing corn, let's say, and the benchmark is 80% of that crop's water use, many of our farmers are already using less water than that benchmark would be, so they would actually be allotted more water. It won't bring up the water table, and it won't put water back in anybody's well. And part of that is because there are no provisions or requirements for recharge and other projects within an AMA. It can happen, but it's not required. So why would we not instead work on those projects outside of increased regulation, consider an INA, those other things we've already mentioned. And I disagree with Christian. I believe that it does not give us local control. It puts it in the hands of the state. The Groundwater Users Advisory Council is appointed by the governor. They do have to live in the area, but they are appointed by the governor. There is no requirement that they be representative of the different industries and portions of our valley. Again, I keep hearing judicial review, judicial review, judicial review. I work with the Forest Service, the BLM, the state land, the NRCS,
Thank you, Sonia. You know, I mean, we think about this and we've kind of focused on this AMA is going to work and we're going to slow the overdraft and all these wonderful things are going to happen. And the problem is we're going to marry ourselves to this plan. And the biggest problem is you can't get divorced. We'll never be able to get rid of the AMA. It will be in perpetuity. We talk about going to court. We talk about judicial review. We talk about public referendum. Probably not going to happen. In 1980, the AMA was formed in Pinal County. My family farmed there. My brother still farms that farm today. He would not support an AMA after 40 years of being in one. And I asked him the question, do you use less water today than you did in 1980? And his answer was, hell no. He uses as much as he can. He still flood irrigates. He still grows the same crops my grandfather grew in Casa Grande in 1928. So this thing is not as flexible and as inventive as I think people are trying to make it.
We have 1 minute for a rebuttal.
Thanks. Yeah, so there's really only one way to fix the major problem of water decline, and that's with regulation. And when me and Rod talked the other day, we went through all the different solutions, and I said, well, what are we going to actually do to fix a problem? And as you said, you have to wait for regulations to come in. And you said the legislators are going to wake up to the problem, and they're going to come in and give us some regulations. So the only way to stop corporations is with the power of law. Do we want to wait for the legislators to come and choose those laws for us, or do we want to use an AMA where we've got judicial review, we've got public hearings, and if we need to, we can come back tomorrow, let's say 2024, amend the AMA so that we have a majority representation on the GUAC, the advisory council, who has the final say in our plans. Otherwise, it's just fatal, down, 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 and that's it. And in the Phoenix AMA, they have cut back their water use.
Okay. So our next question, what role should government and law play in water management for our valley? This time we're going to start over here.
Already been answered. Yeah.
You have 4 minutes, I'm sorry, 5 minutes.
I just worded it differently.
Thank you very much. Again, when I participated on the Wilcox Working Group, the people from the ADWR would come down and we'd spend time with them. It was usually a 2-hour meeting about twice a month. About half the meetings were attended by the director himself. We almost always had the hydrologist there. It was kind of like a master's class on how water management is in Arizona. And we learned a lot about it. And again, the government will decide. I mean, the problem with the AMA ultimately is we think there's going to be some community control over it, and that's just not so. If you'll read the law, you'll see that the director is basically in charge of the AMA. He will appoint an employee of the ADWR to manage that AMA. There will be an advisory council that's appointed by the governor. Who do we think is going to be on that advisory council? The advisory council right now in Pinal County, the advisory council is suing the ADWR over a disagreement about how the plan has been structured. The other problem is the goal. Who sets the goal for the AMA? Do we get to set the goal? We do not. What happens is the director sets the goal for the AMA. Most of the goals for all of the other AMAs, and remember, this will be the first, well, it won't be the first, it will be the first AMA, it will be the second INA-AMA that has been formed after the original law. But the director sets the goal. And in 1980, or 1982, by the time they got around to getting all the goals out, the director had to assign so many grandfathered water rights in Pinal AMA that the goal was planned depletion. The goal was the depletion of the aquifer, and they were going to try to slow it down a little bit, but they understood right off the get-go that it was not going to be sustainable. Do we want that? I don't know. I think we can come up with a better goal. The thing that saved all of those AMAs is they had outside water. Are we going to have outside water? We're not going to get water from the Colorado River here. We're not going to get water from the Gila River here. We have the water that's under us, and that's our what we got to live with. How do we recover this basin? That's the question. And I think the AMA is the incorrect answer. Again, the original purpose of the AMA was not for places like Wilcox. It was for places like Phoenix, where they were trying to transition the legal water rights from the farmers to the urban development. Okay? And guess what? It worked great. And this was told to me directly by Bruce Babb. I've had several conversations with him, and he's very interested in this problem. Of course, he's kind of 90 years old, but he's still got a passion for water, and he's the governor that was in place when we passed this Groundwater Act. So, since we are so dissimilar to these other basins, how is it going to be so effective here? Again, do we need regulation? Yes, we do. So I'm not disagreeing with him on that. Do we need to slow the overdraft? Yes, we do. What kind of regulation do we need? The closest to us that we can get. For 13 years, I ran the downtown Tempe Business Improvement District. It's a special improvement district, much like what we're talking about. An irrigation district works in the same way. Has a local board that's elected by the voters, and not the landowners, basically. It is a way to collect money from the water withdrawal and use that money for recharge. So you have a fund, you have a basic budget that you can work with that the locals are going to have some input on. Right now, they cannot charge for the water. The state cannot charge irrigators and AMAs for the water. That's what the irrigation district will do. The general counsel of the Arizona Wine Growers Association, which I was president of 3 terms, was a guy by the name of Bob Lynch, passed away last year. He was also the general counsel of the irrigation district and Electric District Association in Phoenix. And he told me many, many times, Rod, you guys got to look, we were talking about this AMA and these other options, the Groundwater Association says you really need to look at a water district. And he had been in on all the water law in Arizona for 50 years. And I finally did a little research on it, and I got to believe that it's a viable alternative to the AMA and will actually get some things done.
All right, we have 4 minutes for a response.
Let me first say that the water district is not a solution. It does not attack the root cause of overdraft. Would it help some people? Yes, it would in the short term, but it doesn't stop the continued decline of the water table. The AMA is law, and what you're saying is we need different law. And these guys did a great job. Mr. Sykes over there as well. They went to the legislature after your meetings, your 2 years of meetings, and the legislature would not even open a folder. They did absolutely nothing with their good work and their recommendations to the legislature. Title 45 is current law. You can read it. It's in black and white. We've got a 40-year track record. The AMA in Pinal County, where your brother is very different. It is planned depletion. It's no wonder he uses more water than he did when he started. All the other AMAs are safe yield, which the goal is to bring the water into balance. Use over, is it perfect? No, it's not. It's going to take some tweaking. It's going to take us to get to work, even if it passes, okay? But we can read it. There's going to be regulation one way or another. Just like I think about like hunting laws. A lot of hunters in this room. I used to hunt. You realize that without regulation, our buffalo, our elk, Johnny, you know this, our deer, would have been hunted into extinction by commercial hunters. That's what's happening with our water table. This will not get resolved without some form of power equal to that of the large out-of-state corporations that are here, already own better than 60% of our irrigated land. It will take regulation. The AMA is written, I can read it, I know what it says, I have no clue, and this is what worries me the most. If we give it back to the legislature, no clue what they will do. None.
Mark said a lot there. I want to just speak to, yeah, you guys said we won't come together and make the AMA work. And I think we will. I think we have to. I don't think there's anyone in here, if the AMA passes, who's going to say, well, I'm just going to step away now. No, I think they're going to be coming to town halls. We're going to be putting our ideas together, and we're going to be going up to those public hearings, which will be here, and making our will known. I don't see Sulphur Springs Valley settling for anything less than our way. And if you think you can't get that, I think we have a failure, let's say defeatist attitude. Because you're not going to get any change unless you believe in your own ability to control the government. That's the only way. If you're saying, oh, well, we can't control the AMA, what else can you control? Nothing. That's it. And the AMA gives us more finger holds than any other solution. You know? And if it didn't work, the legislators would be trying to take away our ability to do referendums on the ballot this year. You'll see those items when they're trying to make it harder for us. And if it didn't work, you wouldn't see citizen petitions on the ballot this year. It doesn't work. We can do it. And I think we definitely will. I don't think anyone's going to be twiddling their thumbs if this AMA passes. We are going to make it work for us. It's a mindset change. And that's the only way we're going to address the bigger issue of the corruption we see in our politicians, is that the community starts coming together, getting better educated, engaged, connected with each other, and reminding the government that we're in charge. Being afraid of the government, I tell people, is like the shop owner being afraid of the manager. It's no good. And if you have that mindset, there is no solution. But if you have the mindset that we do have control, the AMA is a great solution because it stops the corporation now, and it buys us more time, and it saves us from losing more of our neighbors and small farms. Why would we let them continue to push our neighbors away, you know, or over these years, 2 years, whatever it takes to change the laws as we need it? It just doesn't make sense to me.
I would say to let.
No, I'm afraid you won't. 1 minute for rebuttal.
All right. I would agree with Mr. Sawyer that we need to control our government. But I would say that's the very reason we don't want an AMA. We need to come together as a community, as you said, but in a way that we form consensus. And that's why the effort failed in previous years. There was no consensus by the time it got to the legislature. And your state representatives, senators, are not going to act on something when there's no consensus. They're not foolish. And the other part of that, I would disagree with Mr. Spencer in that we do not know what it says. We know the outline. That's what the AMA law tells us. But because this has not been done before, there are some things that are not clearly defined, because this is the first time an AMA is being designated with an initiative and not under the legislation with the 1980 groundwater law. So we don't know what we're voting for.
Okay. Let's move to the next question. What would be the difference between an INA and an AMA in the Douglas and Wilcox? We'll start this time, 5 minutes on this table.
Okay, in an INA, the INA has the ability to freeze irrigation, as Ron has mentioned, much like the AMA. And they'll say that it's worked well and helped to bring the water level, the amount of water that's being withdrawn from the Douglas Basin. But the fact is, if you look at the data over the last 45 years of what's happened with irrigation in this whole valley, not just Douglas Basin, but also the Wilcox Basin, and I have a copy of the graph, I can go over this with you. Those of you who've been around here for a while know we had a huge boom in agriculture here in the 70s. I can remember coming down in the 70s to Boy Scout. There were tons of new wells, all these farmers from Texas coming down here. The use of water shot up to 350,000 acre feet a year. Huge. That's a huge peak on it. You see how fast it came down? That was the oil embargo, and some commodity prices took the took out any economic profit out of the farming in this valley. And it wasn't the INA that caused that. That drop occurred at that time period, and we have not totally recovered from that. Get back to that. In the Douglas Basin, or in the Wilcox Basin, we've seen a significant increase in irrigation since then, and particularly in the last 20 years. But also in the Douglas Basin with the INA, since they reached that low point in the early part of the INA, they've gone up a little bit, then they came down in the 1990s. They started increasing, and from 1995 to 2015, we've seen a 43% increase in the irrigation in the INA. And that continues to increase to this day. So the question is, how is the INA really working in that case? And big investors are investing and drawing more water up. The INA doesn't necessarily stop how much water they're bringing up from each well.
Right, you'll see in the Wilcox Basin water graphs that the water level came back up because the water use declined at the same time in the 70s in the Douglas and the Wilcox Basin. So the INA was not the cause of the decrease in water use. The INA, not only does it not fix the problem, it doesn't really stop the expansion of irrigation when we look at water quantities. You can buy irrigated acres and then increase the amount of water you're pumping from on those acres, and that's what happens. Riverview is taking advantage of that. They've moved down into the Douglas Basin over the last couple of years. So we can expect an acceleration of the decline in the Douglas Basin if we leave things as it were. The AMA closes those loopholes. The AMA controls how much water gets pumped. And that's the only way to protect our neighbors and our small farmers, is to put limitations that are fair on how much water is being used. Otherwise, it's goodbye everyone except for those who can afford to drill the deepest wells, and they know that, and it's to their advantage to keep declining the water level, so it's harder for other people to keep up with it. And then it's everyone's more willing to sell out to Riverview when you can't keep drilling a deeper and a deeper and a deeper well. So I'm in an INA. My neighbor's wells have gone dry. I don't feel protected by an INA. I'm trying to build a future. Start a family 20 years in the future. What am I going to do when my well goes dry? You know, maybe I'm trying to get a car to take my kids to school, and now I have to get a well. That's just one person. This is hundreds of wells in the Douglas Basin that are going to go dry if the water level doesn't stop declining. So we have to make a choice, essentially. Do we want to let those who are profiting off the water have as much as they want and to the detriment of everyone else, or should we all get together and play fair so that we can all have a future here? The AMA. You know, if there is a freeze right now from the AMA in the Douglas Basin, Riverview has, I think, they've applied for 20 new wells. If we don't pass the AMA, they get to drill those. They get to pick up right where they've left off. And if you see their expansion every year, it's more and more and more and more. Why take your foot off the cow's neck? It doesn't seem wise. We can try to find other solutions. We can try to put other laws in place. Why, in the meantime, would we let these big corporations continue to knock out our neighbors and small farms? Doesn't seem wise to me. And it doesn't seem considerate of those neighbors either. And the last thing I'll say, it's recognized that there's a problem in the INA, because when I first started researching this in English, I talked to her, I said, and the other supervisors, and said, what are we going to do about this? And we're going to stop. We're going to stop their withdrawals.
All right, we have 4 minutes of response time.
Living within the INA, I have to say I'm opposed to an AMA because it does move management further away from us. The INA has stopped the expansion of irrigated land, and it does cover the nearly all of arable land within the Douglas watershed. And it also regulates those wells or those acres that have been assigned to the wells. It can be a more dynamic document. We do have other alternatives there. You talk about laws and changing things. You might look at keeping things local with your local conservation district, which is a legal subdivision of state government and has authority to do things if they are interfaced with to develop those resources. Going in that direction would keep the control on the land, closer to the land, with decisions that fit our watershed more exactly and not give control of it to the people in Phoenix. And I'd also like to point out that once an AMA is in place, there is an advisory board, but it is an advisory board. Big money in Tucson or anywhere else can step in and say, push the governor or the chief of the Department of Water Resources to go against what the locals want. There's no mechanism to prevent that. When you're working through your conservation district, which is private landowners, both farmers and rural people, the only qualification to be a district member is to own an acre of land in the county. And that is a much more viable alternative in my mind.
Great, thanks, Ron. You know, before I even knew there was an AMA effort to put it on the ballot, I got a call from a friend of mine that is one of the local partners of Riverview. And he told me, did I know about the AMA? I said, no, I didn't. And he said, well, we're going to be neutral. We're going to take a neutral position. So I just want to let everybody know that this is, our side is really a local group of the small farmers. We asked the question, how does an AMA help the small farmers? Well, for the vineyards, almost all of us own more land than we have developed. It takes a lot more time and money to put in a vineyard than it does an acre of corn. And so it takes years, decades longer to develop a full-blown vineyard. And I've been working on mine for 22 years and I'm not even halfway done. Do we really need this quick fix right now? I can appreciate the idea that it's going to slow down the well drilling, but I can tell you that it will also damage the small farmer. I don't believe it's a benefit to the small farmer. Do we have time for a better solution? I believe that we do. There's 52 million acre feet of water from 1,200 feet up in this basin. In some places, it's worse than others. That's what the hydrologist from the state told us. There's still a lot of water here, and is it going to go away tomorrow or in 5 weeks or 5 years? No, but we do have some time, but we've got to get going. The best thing about having this AMA election, if it fails, is that it's kind of woke up politicians. And maybe now they'll be ready to listen to us on some of these other solutions that we're going to come up with.
Okay, we have 1 minute for our rebuttal.
Oh, yeah, an English comment. She just said, yeah, we can't stop the decline. That's all there is to it. And I hope people do research before moving into the Douglas Basin. Kind of a defeatist attitude. I don't share it. And I think we have to do something, and we're going to do something. A quick figure, when we talk about the urgency of the situation, in the next 20 feet of decline in the Wilcox Basin, we're looking at 500 wells going dry. 20 to 40 feet, 600 wells going dry. 40 to 100 feet, over 1,000, 100 to 200, almost 1,400, 1,400, and then another many more hundreds after, and so on and so forth. It's very urgent, and it's people's livelihoods, and it's people who won't have recourse to anything else except to sell out, move out, and say goodbye to all the time and money they've invested.
The volume down there doesn't matter. What matters is you can afford to access it.
All right, good job. All right. We're now going to move to a section where each panelist has an opportunity to answer the question. The question being, why does your vision for an ideal agricultural future in our valley, and does it include safe yield? You each have 3 minutes, but before we start there, I would remind you that the next section is audience questions. If you haven't filled out a index card and you do have a question, you'll need to get that done during this next section where each of them have 3 minutes. So you have 18 minutes to get your question on paper. I'll be collecting those from the basket in the back and picking them randomly using the time that we have allowed. So I'd like to alternate. I know it'll be difficult with the microphone. Who's got the microphone? All right, Steve, we'll start with you. So one of you at this table, then one of you at the next, until all of you have had an opportunity. The order won't matter as long as you alternate. So 3 minutes. The question, what is your vision for an ideal agricultural future in our valley, and does it include safe yield?
Any future for agriculture in this valley has to include less use of water. I mean, that's just a given. There's only so much water down there. This water's been gifted to us. It was left there much of it over 20 to 40,000 years ago, and it's all is down there. It's what they call fossil water, and there's not a lot of recharge happening every year. Okay, and we're at a point where we're getting close to where that water is going to be very inaccessible, particularly here in the low-cost basin. As far as agriculture goes here, if you think about it, right now, 97% of the water being used, irrigated, the water being used in this valley, groundwater being used is irrigated water for agriculture. So agriculture has to be part of the solution. There's absolutely no problem, no question there. And I would challenge our folks, our farmers, Rod and Ron, Sonia, and all the other farmers in the area, to think about what that vision, what that future looks like. And to me, I think we have at least some bit of a clue of what it looks like. There's one farmer here who's actually pretty well known for what he's done. I won't name him, but I think many of you know him. And I was on the phone with him a few weeks ago, and I said to him, hey, I just want to thank you, because what you're doing, I think, is the future of farming here. Low water use crops that don't use much more water than the rain that falls from the sky. You've seen them all on 191, some of them on Birch Road. That's where we have to go. We cannot continue to feed 120,000 cattle here at a feedlot with water that's coming from our ground, and then those cattle are all exported back to the Midwest. That's like mining our water. They're taking our water. Agriculture, we don't want that kind of agriculture here. The vision of agriculture has to be low water use and a smooth transition from high water use to low water use crops. We need to put incentives in place that get farmers to do that, but we're not going to be able to grow the traditional crops, at least not in the quantities we have now. It's just, it's like your checking account. You can't keep taking more, you can't keep writing more checks than what you have in the checking account. Eventually you're going to get overdrawn, and eventually your well's going to go dry.
Well done. You had seconds left. Hi, Mr. Venus.
Safe yield was a new term to me just days ago, and I had to inquire what it meant. And I've been given to understand that safe yield is only taking out as much as goes back into the aquifer. And that's really a neat bookkeeping kind of approach. However, as I suggested before, we're rushing water off the country as quick as we can. And at best, what goes back into the watershed is an educated guess. And maybe not always a real accurate one. I mean, hydrology is not an exact science. And with that said, I agree with anybody that thinks we need to do something. An AMA is, to my way of thinking, from interfacing with the federal government and the state government and county government, the further you move it away from the land, the the worse the results are you get. We need to manage. We need to do it here. And within our basin, the Douglas Basin, the INA can be made to work. It has locked down the number of acres that can be irrigated. We are reporting annually our water use to DWR. They have chosen to not comment on it. Don't throw the baby away with the bathwater on this one. Keep this down close to the ground level, and we'll get solutions that we can live with instead of edicts from the government.
The future of agriculture in our valley. I don't feel like I get as much weight to talk about that as people who are already farming. But I plan on farming, and I've done a lot of research on what I want to do with my land. And under an INA, I don't get to do more than 2 acres of irrigation at a time. And me and many others who are young families who are homesteading the valley have been doing a lot of research to figure out how can you maximize what you can do with 2 acres of irrigation. You can rotate, you can establish low water use crops. And we want to build a new sustainable agricultural economy here. It's going to be a lot of hard work, and it's going to be a multi-generational process, but that's our goal. And it's going to be, I'm the kind of person who, give me a really hard problem, I'm happy, because I like hard problems, right? But this isn't just my problem. This is a problem for a lot of other people. People who don't want a hard problem, they want to have a retirement. They want to just take care of their family. They want their well to not go dry. So I want an agricultural community that lives in harmony with residents who just want their well water, and that's it. And I think we can do it. I think we're creative, smart, hardworking people. I think there's enough leadership in this community to get people organized around plans, to get consensus. But you're never going to get any amount of consensus to tell Riverview or Trinut or these big guys what to do. They're not going to roll over and be like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll cut my profits. Nope. That's what law is for. That's why our founding fathers were very, very, very weary of corporations. We're not supposed to give them so much control. The government's there as a tool to control them. And if we're not going to use the tool, we're going to lose it. We're going to lose our liberties. We're going to lose our water. They're going to buy out more. We're going to have a lot of vineyards here one day, because at some point, all you're going to be able to afford to grow are low water use crops like grapes, yucca, and so on and so forth. But who's going to own all the land when the government declares an emergency and puts a freeze on the agriculture? How much more will they have bought out by that time? Do we want more small farmers, small families doing that agriculture? Or do we want a few really big guys grandfathered in forever? Because that's the only other path. Either we take some action, we use the law, we wield it to defend our liberties, or we sit around and, hope that something happens. The AMA is the only thing that actually brings control closer to us, because we don't have any right now. Only the people with the deep pockets have control. That's it. And we have to use the law. So, safe yield, of course, because that's the only future for people who want private access to their well water. It's the only thing, safe yield. We got to get it, and it's in the statutes. It's a balance, and just, I don't know if I'll have time. No, I won't have time. All right.
What's the future of this basin? I think it's probably the best question. If the AMA happens, I see the water table continuing to decline. We're going to award a major corporation rights to that water for a long, long time. They'll be able to sell it. If they retire their farm, they still hold 3 acre-feet per acre. And that water can be moved to a subdivision, someplace up along the mountain. It cannot be used for irrigation. It can be used for urban development. So it's kind of, the AMA probably will not work as well as our friends over here think it will, and it might even be worse. So my vision for the future is a transition to low water use. Gee, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Grapes use 8 inches a year. Corn uses 4.5 feet a year. So if 65,000 acres of this valley was planted in wine grapes, we would not have an overdraft, we would not have this discussion tonight. If we pass the AMA, it will make it extremely difficult for us to continue to grow and expand the wine industry and the vineyard industry in this basin, because the land will not be available. All the land available will not have any water rights. And so we're not going to grow the wine industry. Can we go get the water rights from Riverview? They cannot move those water rights for irrigation. So we would have to farm on land down in the bottom of the valley, which is not as advantageous for vineyards as on the slopes. So we are not going to be the solution. If we pass the AMA, vineyards are not going to be a solution. If we don't pass the AMA, I understand how difficult it is to have this monster corporation in charge of so much water, but why would we give them more time? If we pass the AMA, we're basically giving them the rights to the water. If we had 65,000 acres of vineyards, pistachios only use about 2¼ acre feet. They're very high value. An acre of cotton generates about $700 a year in economics, so we can talk about economics now. An acre of vineyards can generate somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000 a year. So if we can if we can find a bridge to where we can operate where the economics are going to drive this. These guys are not going to be here forever. The 4 dairies in Phoenix and Pinal County broke the farm bank 5 years ago because they were losing $1 million a day. So that could happen with Riverview. That's just the way things work. So are we going to give them the rights to the water in perpetuity, or are we going to try to work our way through this?
We have a very similar vision, Ron. I'd like to see more high-value agriculture in the valley, more vineyards. I don't think that the AMA will conclude that. I really don't. I believe that if it passes, that we will come together and we will work just as hard on our legislature to make a few minor changes. One would be, as you called for, portable irrigation rights. But we start from a position of strength. If we go to them and say, write something, we have no idea what they're going to write. We have an AMA. We know what it says. We need 2 things. We need portable irrigation rights so that you can transfer, let's say, one of the farmers here, Mr. Curry, who may have excess, or who knows, somebody may have excess. You transfer that excess right, purchase it from them, move it to the slope, expand your vineyard. So we need that. We also need a withdrawal fee. And this was given to me an idea by farmers. I think it came up in your plan back in 2015, presented to the legislature. If you're using the water that exists under your property, that's natural recharge. Okay, even though state law doesn't agree with me, that's your property. Do with it what you want. When you start pumping more, you are taking water from under my land. That's my property. That's where I draw the lines. If you're going to do that, you should pay for it. Ranchers, right? You pay for grazing on public land, do you not? Yes, you do. You pay when you use public property to profit privately. Miners, when they mine in national forest, they pay for those minerals they're withdrawing. Right now, the farmers who are, and there's only a handful of them, I'm not talking about the little guys, that are literally pumping us dry. They pay nothing for that public asset that affects all of us. I'm sorry, there's no better place for government than in that situation where my rights are being balanced against another person. What am I to do? I'm not going to take up arms. I'm not going to talk to them nicely and have them roll back their use. No. The AMA is a tool. It's a step in the right direction. It has already frozen the expansion, which will help all farmers in the long run. Farmers are going to have to chase the water just as deep. When water goes to 800 feet, most of the farmers I know won't be able to afford to pump it. We've frozen it. It has been frozen right now since the election was called. We know that it's done now. Is it perfect? I'll never say it is. I say that to everybody. But we can get in there from a position of strength, ask the legislature. We already know what it says. We need 2 little changes. We need portable irrigation rights, and we need withdrawal fees for the biggest users. That would, in my opinion, fix the AMA, help it to make the right future for all of the farmers in this valley.
I got another second, I'll just spend on it. I didn't see the stuff. I thought
Hey, Steve.
Never mind.
Hey, Steve.
Well, the question is, what's your ideal vision? So I'm going to start there. First of all, 2% of our citizens serve in the military and keep us safe, and thank you for doing that. I would also tell you, less than 2% of citizens in this country grow your food. So the agriculture is not just something nice to look at. It's not just someone who's getting in your way. It is a matter of national security that we grow our food to feed ourselves, our neighbors, and the world. My ideal vision for this valley, my son and daughter-in-law are sitting in the back. I want my great-grandkids to be ranching here. And that's what every farmer and rancher in this valley wants, is to pass on what they've worked hard to put together in a legacy of loving the land to their children. And we can do that through working together to find solutions that work for all of us, from a residential water district to INA or other options. But this AMA will not allow our farmers, our family farmers, to stay in business. In the long run, if they have to cut their production to what is known as safe yield bank, which would be 20% of what they're doing today, I can tell you names of people who will be out of business in 5 years. And you will not have the food that you need. And I know some of you are going, oh, we only grow livestock food. I realize some of you do not eat meat, but an awful lot of Americans do. And if we do not protect our agriculture, we do not have national security. So we need to work together, not being us versus them, and agriculture's the people who are, because water use is not equal to water waste. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the last call for index cards. Okay, as a reminder as how this is going to work, I'm pulling cards at random. Each side has 2 minutes total, not each person, 2 minutes total, to answer the question. And we'll alternate again, so I'll just start with this first question here, and the next question will be, after both sides have answered, the next question will start here. Okay. It sounds like the vineyard would not be able to expand if the AMA is adopted. I live just a short few miles from the vineyard, and I'm afraid that my well could easily run dry if they do expand. Am I wrong?
I think you are. The wells in the on the west slope of the Chiricahua Mountains have actually come up. The survey done in 15 shows that and my own wells have come up about 20 feet since we started pumping in 2002. And I give the credit to that to the Austins, who did about 6,000 mini dam structures on drainages all over their ranch on the western side of the Chiricahuas, and I believe that helped recharge that whole area. And so I would have to answer probably, probably not. It's not an absolute. Like Ron said, hydrology is not a perfect science.
Do we still have time?
You do?
Okay. I would also say one thing we haven't mentioned yet tonight is that everyone assumes if you no longer get water out of your well is dry. There's a lot of wells in the area that are older and have not been properly maintained. And we know of several stories lately of well drillers who have gone to fix people's wells who've said, my well's gone dry, I'm not getting water. They drill the well right next to it, within 10 feet, and hit water at a higher level than they had originally had their pump set at. Sometimes it's not about water's gone, it's about your casing is corroded and your well's no longer usable. So I just wanted to bring that up.
That's why God invented baking
Sometimes
soda
your well isn't dry, it's just
and
needs
dry
maintenance.
ice. I did that on mine.
We irrigate 8 acres. We have a house, we have a winery, production winery, and we have a pretty big lawn area we irrigate, and it's done with a 22-gallon a minute well.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to repeat the question? It sounds like the vineyard would not be able to expand if the AMA is adopted. I live just short few miles from the vineyard, and I'm afraid that my well could easily run dry if they do expand. Am I wrong?
I think, as Ron said, the hydrology is not exact science. I would recommend you get your well level tested or measured, and then know how deep your well is. That gives you an idea of how many feet you've got. The grape growers, the wine growers, are not drawing a heck of a lot of water, as Rod said. That's absolutely true. But he was also not totally, he didn't tell the whole story about the water levels in this valley, because where he's at, he's actually in a very fortuitous area. That whole area, he lives between Rock Creek and Turkey Creek, or just to the side of one. None of the other vineyards are right in that area. That's one of the best areas for recharge in this whole valley, in this whole Wilcox Basin. And part of it's because of some of the recharge work, the check dams and all that have been put in by the previous family that owned that ranch, owned that land up, or leased that land up in the Turkey Creek tributaries. So yes, it could, your well could go dry. But if another side of that story, if you're next to the vineyards that are over in Kansas Settlement, your well could very well go dry for a number of reasons. Number one is Kansas Settlement has one of the largest cones of depression. And cone of depression is when a lot of large wells get together and start sucking the water out in a very localized area. As much as 40 feet a year, some places have seen drops in the Kansas Settlement area. And even in Riverview, which has put in multiple large concentrations of centrifuges, has seen some of their wells drop 100 feet a year has been reported because of cone of depression. So yes, you could, and I know for a fact that the Riverview just bought the old Rob's Ranch, or Rob's Farm up there that was in bankruptcy. They bought that out. It was originally bought by TriMet, then by Riverview. Riverview set up at least 8 new centrifuges there. They're going to start pumping the heck of the water out there. And I feel bad for the guys that are there, because they're the wine growers, because their wells are going to go dry.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What specific water conservation measures would be prescribed for farms, and how will it be paid for? I don't know if that's in the context of
Sure.
anything, but.
Well, in an AMA, ultimately, if you have the attitude that we have control over the government, it's exactly what we wanted to prescribe. If you have the attitude that we don't control the government, then we're screwed either way, pardon my language. So we put the AMA in place, we come together, we figure out what's a plan that works, and we will have to, work with everyone. But the only way to get people's wells from going dry is safe yield. And we can talk about, of course, agriculture is important. Of course, we need to feed people. But if you don't have safe yield, you can only do that for so long, because once the water level gets to a certain depth, you have to switch over to another crop, low water use crop. It's going to happen sooner or later. So the question is, do we want to do it sooner so that more people can keep their wells in small operations, or do we want to wait till later when a few people control all of them? So the answer is we choose. If you believe in we the people, we put our think tanks together, which has already gotten underway. I'm sure, I imagine others anticipating the possible pass of the AMA have been thinking, well, what are we going to do when we show up at those public hearings and demand from those management plans? I don't think people are just sitting around. Then we have just judicial review, very strong, finger hold, we use it all the time. We do things every day where we feel protected in doing them because we know we have recourse to judicial review. I can take you to court if you mess with me. If I go out on the road today, I'm not afraid that someone's going to run into me because they know that I can take them before a judge and pay damages. We rely on that all the time. If you don't have faith in that, what are you going to have faith in for anything?
What specific water conservation measures would be prescribed for farmers, and how will it be paid for?
That's an open question. Is that with an INA, an AMA, or under current situations with no
Do
management?
your best to guess.
Under an AMA, I would be very concerned about the state of Arizona making the suggestions to us. Under an INA, it can be controlled, however, it is not. All we do is report our water, and within an INA, the acres do not get to expand. And without either, there is things that are going on. The federal government, through USDA and RCS, working with Forest Service, Arizona Game and Fish, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they're all funding conservation work with farmers and ranchers to implement the best science available at the time. So there are measures being taken. There are sound measures that are based on current science. And I would just encourage you folks, anybody, to engage in the conservation districts, the public meetings on how these monies are being allocated and spent. Farming isn't going to go away, hopefully. And we need to take care of it. We need to take care of the rest of our resources too. Beyond the farms and the subdivisions, there's the open land that needs protecting, and we got to look at population growth as part of the answer, as well as small recharge projects, numerous, and alternatives that haven't come up yet. Thank you.
15 seconds. The only time I hear any talk about conserving water is when an AMA is being requested by the public. Why should I believe anyone will take up the banner of conservation once this ballot initiative is settled? Will the RWA continue to have any interest in conservation if an AMA doesn't pass?
I'll start. Absolutely, we want to continue if an AMA does not pass. We absolutely want to be one of the folks and groups that help bring that coalition together. And the groundwater conservation proposal that didn't get past the legislature because of lack of consensus is still out there. We could start there, but we need to work together, and absolutely we're interested in that. I understand that there's not a lot of talk publicly when there's not an AMA or other proposal out there, but I can tell you from my own personal experience, and as Ron just alluded to in the previous question, ranchers and farmers are always looking for ways to conserve, to improve, new technologies adopted. Ron can talk real quick about the history of irrigation on farms. Just because you're not hearing it in the news doesn't mean it's not happening.
Irrigation on farms.
Yeah.
Been working with that since 1974, when we were uniform slope irrigating and having tailwater recovery ponds and pumping water back. It went to high volume, small acreage flood irrigation. It went from there to gated pipe irrigation, and from there surge irrigation, and then side rolls and where center pivots, which are good state-of-the-art when they're set up properly and have proper nozzling, and the farmers are setting them to the crops. They have to, just have pure economics. And the latest technology is subsurface irrigation through irrigation tape. Farmers are ripping into the ground, so there's never any water on the surface. It's all sub-irrigated. Thank you.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Please.
Short memory spans up here.
I know, I do too. The only time I hear any talk about conserving water is when an AMA is being requested by the public. Why should I believe anyone will take up the banner of conservation once this ballot initiative is settled? Will the RWA continue to have any interest in conservation if an AMA does not pass?
So I think the best way to answer this question is look at the track record and the history and some recent events. RWA is basically a coalition, primarily the Farm Bureau and the wine growers and some of the other farmers here. But the Farm Bureau has a long history of basically saying no to any water regulation in this state. A long history. And that is absolute truth. And I'll give you an example. They talk about local control. We had a state legislature from the Kingman area. Kingman is slated to run out of water in 50 years. The boards of supervisors in Mojave County, the city council in Kingman are like going crazy trying to figure out how are we going to deal with this. So the legislature from that area put together a bill called the Rural Management Act. And it addressed a lot of this local control issue. Guess who the number one opponent of that was?
Gail Griffin.
Well, Gail Griffin was one. Number two, the Farm Bureau.
Yeah,
I was at a hearing where they talked about, and they were laughed at by folks because it's like they obviously don't want to have any solution. They just don't want anyone to have any hands on the water and regulate it. Period. That is true. And Sonia, I asked you after our meeting here a few months ago, I asked you, what has the Farm Bureau in this area done to deal with the issues of Alan and Rod came together in 2014? Nothing, nothing, nothing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I get emotional about that because that is the truth.
25 seconds.
I'm going to talk about efficiencies because efficiencies are great. You know, I went to Riverview and I went with Peggy Judd, and I'll tell you, they are doing it as efficient as they possibly can. We are irrigating efficiently. Wouldn't you agree? Yes, we are. And we're still pumping 500% of our recharge. Efficiency will not solve this problem. It will not solve this problem. Should we do it? Absolutely. And I applaud the way the farmers are doing it.
Red card, red card, red card.
Thank you.
If I can't have fun, I'm leaving.
If you are on a 5-share well on 10-acre lots and have a livestock training facility with only 1 share being used presently, if future requirements needed another well for the livestock, would that be allowed?
You're gonna have to repeat that one.
Okay, so listen carefully. If you are on a 5-share well on 10-acre lots and have a livestock training facility with only 1 share being used presently, if future requirements needed another well for the livestock, would that be allowed?
I'm going to do my best to do all the, put together all the studying I've done of the statutes. I'm going to say some things, and hopefully whoever asked that question can take what I've said and they'll get their answer from it. In an AMA, you can drill a new exempt well. You can pump up to 35 gallons per minute, and you can use it to pump up to 10 acre-feet of water per year. That's about 3.3 million gallons. So if you need to drill a new well, yes, you can. But there is something, though, in the laws, which is that you can't have, I believe, you can't have 2 wells, 2 exempt wells being used for the same purpose. So what you might have to do in that case, if the share well isn't enough, you give up your share of that one and you drill a new well that gives you enough the water that you need, and that's your new stock water well. A very technical question, and if anyone else has other technical questions like that, I'm not a scholar of the laws yet, but I can try to answer your question because I've read the statutes way too many times.
That's consistent with my understanding of that as well. And you've got to remember, under the AMA, all domestic well owners can irrigate up to 2 acres. So, your local gardens, I know there's been some literature misinformation out there that some of this is going to affect some of that. If you're doing local gardening, if you have a small orchard, it won't affect that at all. Yeah, questions?
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Sure.
I feel like a math teacher here. If you're on a 5-share well on 10-acre lots and have a livestock training facility with only 1 share being used presently, if future requirements needed another well for the livestock, would that be allowed?
That's a question for DWR. And if an AMA is in place, it has to be answered in the language and how that AMA is written. That's the only answer you can give to that question. But I would also like to point out, yeah, your 35 gallon a minute well you can plant trees, you can plant a big garden. But if you read the rest of the statutes, if I'm not mistaken, it also says you cannot sell anything off of that property for commercial gain. Isn't that true?
The other thing is that you talk about being able to do a 10-acre
Could I have one?
year well. You can get a permit for that. It cannot be for irrigation. It has to be for some other use like industrial. So that 10-acre exemption is not related to agriculture.
And I'm gonna tag off of Ron. You can use that exempt well to grow for consumption. However, that's where we disagree on the 2 acres. It's, again, a technicality. If you have 2 acres, you can irrigate up to 2 acres under an exempt well, like 35 gallons a minute or less, and you're fine. But if you grow a crop for the farmer's market, for somebody wants to grow the calf for beef, anything like that, now you need a permit. That's the technicality that we were referring to.
Doesn't everyone have to deepen their well, no matter what?
In the short term, we're
But
talking about
it's,
the AMA getting passed, and it's gonna magically change the whole environment. It's not. It will take years for it to take place. They won't even get the main plan, the management plan, probably for 3 to 5 years. They're supposed to be renewed every 10 years. Just a few years ago, we went to this meeting at the state, and they were talking about how so many of the AMAs were so far behind on their 10-year renewal plans, and it's mostly because the department wasn't keeping up with it. So this is not going to move at the speed of light. It is going to be a slow process, even if the AMA is passed. So, are the wells going to keep going down? Yes. If all the farmers that are currently irrigating are awarded 80% of the benchmark, then the water's still going to go down. And it may not go down 10 feet a year, but it'll go down 8 feet a year. And so that means everybody's going to have to go deeper. The only really way to do this is, the only way to get that reversed is to put more water in the ground. And there's 40,000 acre feet by the ADWR's opinion that is naturally recharged in an average year. If we can have a recharge system that could, and we're only using about 210,000 acre feet right now per year. So we've got that, 160,000 acre, 170,000 acre deficit. So how much of that can we cut away with a recharge program? That's what we're talking about. If we can get more recharge, then we can slow it down, at least instead of having 10 to 8 feet a year, maybe we get down to 2 or 3, and then that becomes a lot more manageable for most people.
I would say the simple answer is yes. If you own a well, save money, you will at some point have to replace it, deepen it, or fix the casing. That's just part of being a well owner.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I have it. Will you have to deepen your well? It depends on a lot of circumstances. It depends on your current depth. The water depends on your location in the valley. There's a good chance you will, though. I think Rod is accurate. As to the AMA and planning, the AMA director, the director of AWR, has to announce the type of plan within 30 or 60 days of enactment. Either a safe yield, okay, or a planned depletion. Planned depletions means they essentially gave up. We're going to manage this area to empty, okay? We qualify for safe yield because we're the fastest sinking valley in the state right now. Our subsidence is horrendous. That's one of the criteria that the ADWR has to use to determine the safe yield. Then it will take 2 years. You have to promote or propose a plan within 2 years after all the public process, and that's after the wait period for anybody who wants to bring it before a judge and challenge it. I think that's a good thing. In the meantime, we've frozen it where it's at. We've arrested the problem where it's at, okay? We've stopped increase. Then we take 2 years to get together and write a plan with ADWR, with the GUAC, and that's the only way it can work. I don't think we want to rush the plan, that's for sure. So, but in that 2 years, The expansion stops where it is right now. If the AMA fails, you bet your bottom dollar, there's gonna be a race to increase irrigated lands like you've never seen before, because they all know something's coming. And it is coming. And they're gonna all race, and I'm not talking about you guys, I hope you do, but there's gonna be the big guys racing to get under that next wire to get as many acres under irrigation as they can in the 2 to 4 years it's gonna take us to do something different. That's serious. Is the AMA perfect? No, it's not. But it has done one thing. It has stopped the expansion in its tracks. If it fails, Annie, hang on to your hats.
Okay, so that ends our question period. You guys have all been amazingly fantastic. It's hard to sit in those chairs for that long.
We saw the rowdy folks.